Hello everyone, I'm Rhiannon Lee Smith from Technology Networks, and today I'm delighted to be joined by Dr. Gray Atherton from Edge Hill University to discuss their latest study published in the journal PLOS ONE, investigating how implicit biases associating autism with males could be affecting the diagnosis and support for autistic females. So thank you for coming on today, Dr. Gray. So first of all, males are around 3 times more likely to be diagnosed with autism. Why do you think this is, and how did previous research impact your study?
Sure. So I think that in general, we know that males are more likely to be diagnosed with almost every neurodevelopmental condition. And we think that there's some reasons that might have to do with socialization of genders. So, for instance, males might be more encouraged to be outspoken. And so, therefore, some of the traits that are associated with neurodevelopmental conditions like autism might be more evident in males. But what we're increasingly finding is that really females increasingly are just as likely to have autism. They just simply are being missed for a diagnosis. So I did a study about a year ago, 2 years ago, that's been published since that looked at autism prevalence and quality of life. And what I found were that females were significantly more likely to be diagnosed late in life. And so they were being missed for diagnosis, and this contributed to lower quality of life. And so that really inspired me to do this study that we're going to be talking about that has to do with the reasons why perhaps women are being missed for a diagnosis of autism. Do we have any underlying biases, maybe as a society, that leads to that misdiagnosis?
Okay, that's really interesting. So, getting on to your study, can you talk about the key methods you used and why?
Sure. So I used two sort of different experiments. The first one I used an implicit association task, which has been used for quite a few decades, usually exploring things like racial bias. An implicit association task is where we take pairings of things like perhaps faces and words that are associated with things like good and bad, and we see how quickly we process those things in relation to one another. So, for instance, a classic example would be a white face paired with words that are good and a black face paired with words that are bad. And it reveals sort of biases we have towards these groups. And so, in this task that I did, I used words associated with autism and neurotypical or non autism and male and female names. And I saw whether participants were quicker at associating, for instance, female names with neurotypical words and male names with autistic words. And what we did find is that yes, people were faster. Or we'll get to key findings, I guess. And then the other thing that I did is I took the autism quotient, which is a self-report measure of autism, and I gave participants a vignette with either a male person that had autistic traits or a female person with autistic traits. The vignettes were exactly the same, they just had a different gender of the person that they were answering the AQ for. I wanted to see whether or not people associated a male person with higher autistic traits than a female person, even though they both presented in the same way.
Okay. So you've mentioned some of them there, but what were your key findings, and was there an aspect of your data that particularly excited you?
Yeah, so this is a pre-registered study, and we predicted that people would be more likely to associate male names with autistic traits on the implicit association test, and we did find that that was the case. We also found that overall, when we looked at the male vignettes and female vignettes and asked people to answer the AQ for these people, for these vignettes, we didn't find that there was a difference in overall AQ score. But what we did find is that some people associated or answered the questions differently depending on if they were male or female. So, for instance, one of the AQ questions has to do with I enjoy social situations. That would be a question that's reverse scored, meaning if you say, yes, I do enjoy social situations, you would get a lower score on the AQ, sort of saying you have less autistic traits. And people were more likely to associate the female with enjoying social situations. sort of, for instance, showing that we associate women with sort of being highly social. And this could lead to a bias in recognizing autistic traits in women because we sort of think, oh, well, women must be more social. So these were the key findings of the study in these two tasks.
Okay, so how do you believe your research will impact how we look at the diagnostic criteria for autism in females?
So I think the study suggests overall that we do have an implicit bias to thinking about autism as being something that would be a male condition. And therefore, women, we have difficulty sort of associating them with autism in general. And importantly, in my study, I also, even though I tested the general population, I asked people how familiar they were with autism. And what I found is that knowledge of autism didn't actually impact these results. So even if you're not very familiar with autism, or maybe if you work with autistic people or have autistic family members, you still might have some implicit biases in associating autism with men versus females. And so I think that that suggests that maybe we need to look at diagnostic criteria or general perceptions of autism and think about how we can maybe change that to be more female friendly or reflect what female autism looks like, because it might look very different or somewhat different to male autism. So, a classic example is when we think about things like special interests or passions in autistic people, something that's very common. We oftentimes have a stereotype of things like trains or transportation or things that are very male. In women, this might look different. It might look like being interested in celebrity culture or makeup or fashion. And so we need to think about how these um, key core characteristics of autism are still going to be present in women, but they might look different. And that doesn't underscore the importance of that diagnosis, if that makes sense. So I hope that it changes the way that we diagnose in a sense that we need to maybe personalize and tailor an autism assessment to both genders.
Okay, so what's next for your research team, and do you have any further studies planned?
Yeah, so I think what's next for our team is we're interested in uncovering what it looks like and what it feels like to be a female presenting autistic person. And so, one of the things that we're going to be doing is conducting some more qualitative research, hopefully with a pretty widespread sample of women that have been diagnosed with autism and understanding what their lived experiences are in relation to gender presentation, and particularly what are some of the unique challenges that women have faced being female presenting and also autistic. Um, how do they think that services can be improved? How do they feel that recognition and identification can be improved? And essentially, what is the intersection between gender and a neurodevelopmental condition like autism? We do have sort of a crisis on our hands of women being consistently missed for our early identification, which allows you to access all kinds of services and more generally advocate for yourself. And so it's really imperative that we change these biases as much as we can so that people can get the help or the services that they need.
Make sure you never miss a story. Subscribe to Breaking Science News now, the daily newsletter by Technology Networks. Bye.